So, welcome to Crayon Conversations, where we chat to guest experts about parenthood and money. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Lynda Moore. Lynda is a mother of one. Inspired by her love of numbers and motivated by her experience of being saddled with $600,000 of debt when her marriage ended, Lynda embarked on a path to go from accounting to psychology. Lynda is the founder of Money Mentalist. As a money mentor coach, she has helped hundreds of couples regain power over their finances. Thank you so much, Lynda, for joining us today.
Look, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
I've got some questions to kick off. We've also had several questions submitted beforehand, so I'll go to those first in the Q&A. But if anything else pops up, please pop it in the chat. And just to let everyone know, today's session is recorded for those who can't make it. So Lynda, to begin with, can you share how you became a money mentor coach and why you founded Money Mentalist?
Okay, I'll give you the short version, otherwise we'll take up the whole time. So basically I was an accountant in practice, and what I noticed with my clients is when things happened in life, it stopped mattering what was going on with their numbers. And as you've alluded to, when my own marriage ended, I responded in exactly the way my clients did. And so that got me curious, and which led me to go back to university and studying psychology and then specializing in the area of money as to, why is it that we just stopped paying attention, or what is going on with this relationship that we have with money. And through working with my mentor, David Kruger, who at that stage had been in the space for over 20 years, it's about 80% of our relationship with money is actually mindset, and it's psychology based. 20% is about the numbers. And as an accountant, I was focusing on 95% of it being numbers and not even knowing that the other 5% was there. So it was a complete and utter flip for me of going, this just makes perfect sense. So I became a client of David's first. I had to work through my whole money story and everything with him, which enabled me to turn my own financial life around and help me get out of that situation of debt. And then I became one of his certified coaches. So I wrapped the two things together. I still love numbers. I still use my background as accountant, but I use it in a very different way to wrap around the psychology of why we do the things that we do. And a lot of it actually comes down to how we communicate. It's how we think, how we feel, and how we behave with our money that makes the numbers work or not work, as the case may be.
And what does a healthy relationship with money as a couple look like? And maybe the flip side, what does an unhealthy relationship look like?
Yeah, so there are a lot of couples who can naturally fall into a healthy relationship with money. Those are the ones I don't tend to see, which is fine. So a healthy relationship with money is actually being able to communicate about it. Now, I said this to my girlfriend and she said to me, oh, but my husband and I, we talk about money all the time. And then she sat back a little bit and she went, actually, no, we yell at each other about money. That's not what I mean. It's actually being able to talk about money and not just the transactional stuff. I mean, we're really good at, gosh, that was the power bill's gone up again, or, hasn't the price of veggies gone up? But actually really understanding and having deep communication about money, which brings in our values, it brings in our beliefs. It's where we want to go with the future. What's our vision and legacy for our financial future? Those kind of conversations are the ones that are harder to have. And we don't sit over our morning cup of coffee and say, hi, honey, I think we need to talk about our relationship with money. So it just kind of slips away. So that's what it is. It's having a really good communication process around money. It's knowing your numbers. You have to know your numbers. You've got to know what's coming in. You've got to know what's going out. You've got to know how to make changes. I do not like budgets. I call them money plans because it's an important part of your life plan. Money should be part of your self-care. In the same way as you look after your health, in the same way that you exercise, looking after your money and your financial future should be up there with that. And typically for us, it's not. So that's kind of the basis of what a healthy relationship looks like. You're enjoying now, but you're planning for the future, and you're talking. Those are really the elements that I see. An unhealthy one, and I can go back to the end of my own relationship. We didn't talk about money at all. I took all the stress of it all. I was the money manager. I didn't talk about it with my husband because I didn't want to stress him out more because he was stressed enough as it was. And so we just put our head in the sand and we just carried on living this lifestyle that was not actually sustainable until it broke our relationship. So that's what an unhealthy one looks like.
Okay. And, you mentioned a lot of us don't talk about it. I think the stats are something like 1 in 3 Kiwis rarely or never talk about money to anyone, not even friends or close family.
Yeah.
So if money isn't something that people are routinely or used to talking to their partner with, what foundations do you recommend that they lay as they get into this conversation? And what's like a good, easy, non-threatening way to start?
The easiest non-threatening way to start is start by talking about someone else. Okay, so it's not you, because generally in a relationship, generally there will be one person who is more comfortable with money than the other one. And this will come from their backgrounds and their families and the environments that they've been in. So quite often it does fall on the one person who is a little bit more comfortable to kind of start these conversations. And as I said, the easiest starting point is the transactional kind of ones. Is the, oh, have you noticed this? Have you seen this? And then you might talk about some friends, or you might talk about others or people in the media and things like that. Because if you try and bring it straight into your own household, if for you've not come from a background where it's been comfortable to talk about money or money's been spoken about, it can feel very threatening. Because some of the things that we actually feel about money is we can feel quite inadequate about it. So your money personality is a behavioral style. It's how you behave with money. And I find for all of the clients that I meet, and whether we work together or not, it's always do your money personality quiz. Because what tends to happen is we fall in love with our opposites. And that's what attracts us to them. And when it comes to money, quite often we are in relationship with our polar opposite money person, which causes some of the frustrations. They might be really cute at the start of the relationship, but 5 years in, those polarizations can start to be difficult. So it's ease into it really gently. And please never hijack a date night to try and start talking about money. Never ever do that.
I think on your website, there's a good money personality test that folks can take if they want to just kind of understand their style a bit better.
Yeah, and I certainly suggest it only takes no more than 15 minutes, and it just gives you that little bit of insight as to what your money personality is. And if you're with your polar opposite, then there's some fun that we can have to help you work those together.
Okay. So money is the number one topic couples fight about, I think, according to the Marriage Project, and the second biggest reason people get divorced after infidelity. So it's a hot button issue for a lot of folks.
It is, yes.
If you find yourself, or if you find that money is a big source of tension in your relationship, how do you break that cycle? And when you find yourself in the heat of an argument, what can you do about that?
Well, first of all, is the argument really about money? Money is a really easy thing to argue about. So sometimes those arguments are about money, but sometimes money can be used as an argument to mask other things within the relationship. And those other things can tend to be around self-esteem and power and control and all of those sorts of things. So it's really, and again, it's really hard in the heat of the moment to actually step back and start to look at any of these other things. So whether you're arguing about anything at all, Gottman has some amazing resources around arguing in a healthy way and how to de-stress and things like that. So if arguing is something, then have a look at Gottman's work. It's absolutely fantastic. But the thing is to be able when you've finished the argument is to actually then start to look back and go, well, what were we really arguing about? And trying to drill down a little bit deeper. If you are able to kind of almost do a debrief on the argument together once emotions have calmed down, then you can start to unpack some of these things. But that's relying on the fact that you've got a really strong relationship foundation underneath where you can talk about these things. Because if you can have an argument about who's stacking the dishwasher and you can remain friends and have a hug and things after that, then it's just understanding that money is just something else that you argue. And I think Gottman says that 80% of our arguments are going to be there the whole of our relationship. They will always be there. It's the other 20% that are the concerning ones. So establish, what are you arguing about? If you can, in the heat of the moment, step back and stop that argument, if you feel it's circular, if one of you is able to do that, then obviously that's the best thing, is actually to stop it. So the arguments that are really about money are usually because you've got your polar opposites. You've got one of you that thinks too much money is being spent. You've got the other one who's thinking that the other partner is being stingy, or you've got one partner who feels that they've got no idea what's going on and they may not want to know. And so the other partner is arguing with them, trying to tell them and force this information onto them that they may not actually want to know about. But quite often the arguments are because polar opposites, and underlying all of those arguments, it comes back down to values and beliefs. That's what will be the underlying thing underneath all of that. Yeah.
So it sounds like one thing folks could do is, understand their money personality, but also have a conversation with their partner about what their partner's personality is, and also to have a conversation around values as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Mm.
And you mentioned Gottman. So just for a bit of context, Gottman, it's a husband and wife research couple. I think they're based in the US. Mm-hmm. And it's some astounding stat, like they can spend 15 minutes with a couple and predict with something like 90+% accuracy whether that couple will get divorced or not. So they've done a lot of research around relationships and what makes a healthy relationship. So they've got a website, they've got a number of books. I think the one I just checked out from the library, it was called 8 Dates.
Yes, I was just going to say 8 Dates. That's a very good book.
It's a really good book. So it's basically 8 topics that you want to talk about with your partner over time. So money is one of them, but also family and, 8 big topics. And they've got conversation guides, etc. And it's quite an easy read, but that's one resource that's out there. I think that's actually pretty helpful for this.
I think that's a really good resource there as well. Yeah. Mm.
And you touched on the fact that money is so much more than numbers, right? Like it also represents control, power, independence, dependence, success, self-worth. So when there's a money imbalance in a relationship, how can you address that? If you've got maybe one person who earns a lot more, or one person who perhaps comes from a family with a lot more money, or where there's perhaps some sort of money imbalance that can lead to a power imbalance, what can people do about that?
Yeah, this is really interesting because sometimes we don't live our own money relationships. We're actually living someone else's. And I had this scenario with a young couple. They were only in their 20s and they were really successful for where they were in their stage in life. But they didn't feel they were, because they were comparing themselves with their parents who had a 40, 50-year relationship going and had a huge, big asset base. And I said to them, when are you going to start living your own relationship and stop living someone else's? So that's the first thing. This is your relationship. How you choose to manage that power imbalance, there is no right or wrong. It's what's going to work for you. So in that kind of scenario, whether it's a pure income imbalance, you can decide, well, actually, we're going to just pull everything anyway, and we're going to totally merge because that's what we want to do. Or you can do partial merges. There's numerous ways of actually managing it, but it comes down to making a conscious decision and doing these things consciously, which is what couples don't do because we don't talk about it in the first place. So typically what happens is you kind of start with this, what I call it the flat account type thing, where you go, oh, we're going to open this bank account, we're going to pay the rent, we're going to put some food, and we're going to put da-da-da-da-da-da. And so money goes into this pot. One partner's left with nothing because they don't earn enough, and the other partner's left with money, and then they want to go out, and it's like, well, how do we pay for this? What are we going to do about this? And this is where the conflict and the difficulties start to arise, because they haven't actually thought through the process so much. It's just kind of, they've just dropped into it because this is what they've seen others do. So this is where what I say the money conversation becomes really important. And when you're talking about things like even just setting up the first flat account, or whatever you want to call it, your first joint account, it's actually being really clear about what's in, what is part of that joint, and what's not joint. And how are you going to deal with these things? And this is where some of the things about stepping back, and you can look at various friends and you can go, oh, well, Joe and Bob, I see they do it that way. What do you think? Or Bill and Joe, they do it this way, or this is what Mum and Dad did. And if you kind of look around for examples, because what you want to look at is, well, what is going to work for you? And it might be a bit of a mix of everything that you've seen around you. But understanding how you relate to money, first of all, and your behaviours with money, is a really important starting point. I've worked with couples and there's no way I would give them a joint account. It just would not work because of their personality styles and the way they view money. So we just literally have a little flat account, and it's very clear what that account pays for. And that's just because of their relationship and what's going on around them in their world. That's the only way it's going to work for them. There's others where it's total merge. Everything is together. And that's because that's how that's going to work for them. So it's different. There is no one right or wrong way. It's understanding what's going to work best for you, where you are in life, and what it is you want to achieve moving forward.
Okay. One of the questions we had beforehand was about, should everything be joint? How can couples structure their finances? And I know you mentioned sometimes you can look around, but if I think about it, I don't know how a lot of my friends structure their finances. It's not something we talk about or that's easily observable, right? A lot of that happens behind closed doors. So I was wondering if you could run us through maybe 3 or 4 different structures and who they're suited for and potentially who they're not suited for.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is when you are past that kind of dating stage, and when you're starting to look at some longer term planning, and the thing I kind of loosely say, when the toothbrush starts moving in a relationship, that's when you want to start looking at the money and maybe sort of talking about it. And the easiest way at this point is to actually is observation. So how does your partner, how do they behave with money in a social setting? Are they the ones that are always buying the rounds of drinks, or are they the last ones who are hanging onto their wallet kind of thing? How does that make you feel? What do you see from that? And vice versa, how does your partner respond when you do things? So if you're the one who shouts the bar all the time, so you can get a bit of a feel as to how you're going to fit by actually observing each other's behaviors. Now, if you've been in a relationship for a while, you've probably switched off to some of that. So just be a little bit more aware about the behaviours. Generally, when a couple comes together, the first thing I do suggest that you have is purely just a little joint account. If you're not living together, that might just be an entertainment account or a going away for weekends account, kind of like a fun account. And see how you go with managing that. You need to decide who's going to be in charge of it. You need to decide how much money you're going to put into it each, and then you're going to decide what it's going to be used for. There's your first money conversation. Now, if you are struggling to even be able to do that, and even to be able to talk about planning for a weekend away and who's going to be doing it, then that would be a few little flags to me that you actually probably need to be a little bit cautious about setting up anything together, because there's obviously some differences and stuff happening there. By the time you get to the point where you are living together, that's where you should have your first joint account that covers what I call the fixed costs. So that would be things like rent, power, insurances, phone, internet, all of those things that are shared. And ideally, depending on your income levels, there'll be 50-50, or if you have got the big up and down, you'll agree on a percentage. And sometimes it's easier to go, I earn 70% more than you, therefore I'll put in 20% more, or something like that. So you kind of come up with what that joint pool is. A lot of couples will stay in that mode for a very, very long time. It's when it comes to that next big decision, like having a family or buying a house together or something like that, you should be in a position of trust by them to be able to merge. Because let's face it, if you trust each other to have a family together, if you trust each other enough that you're going to buy a property together, you should be able to trust each other enough by then to know what each other earns and where it's being spent. And it really surprises me talking to my mortgage broker friends that they get couples turning up in their offices and it's the first time that income has been disclosed to one of the parties. I find that amazing. But to get to that point and not know that information. So by that stage, that's where you want to be, and you want to be now merged, because you are together in life and you want that trust, and it also saves quite a bit of wastage. So there is a practical issue there around that as well, and you want to merge. The most important thing is you always have to have what I call pocket money. And that's an amount of money that you either get in cash each, or it goes into your own personal bank account, and you can do what you like with it. It's outside of your money plan. It's what I call free money. And that will be different for different families. So for example, I've just given myself a pay rise. I give myself $80 a week. And I do what I like with it. So some weeks I don't do anything with it, and then I might go and have a massage. But it's outside of my household. It's totally my money to do what I want. The reason that is so important is because it can help stop any financial infidelity. And we'll come back to financial infidelity. So usually whoever is the one who has most of the child management will need more free money because they tend to pay for more of the bits and pieces when they're out and about with the children. So, you might have 70, your partner might have 100. Whatever it is, you'll agree it doesn't have to be equal, but that is the key thing. You must have some free money. The only time that I would suggest that you do not merge is if there are things like that. You've got some of these warning signs going on and you need to do some more work. And obviously, if there are things like, one of you's got a lot of debt, for example, that you might need to clear first, you don't want to get caught up in that and potentially get, your credit being affected. And obviously the big one, which you might not know up front, of course, is if there's sort of any addictions going on, like gambling and drugs and all those sorts of things. But hopefully you won't get into that cycle. So it's a process. It's a very gradual process.
Okay. And you mentioned the term, is it financial infidelity? Can
Financial infidelity.
A bit more what that means?
Okay, so financial infidelity is basically making financial decisions and then hiding them from your partner. Now, there was it was only a poll, and it was a 50-50 split between the people who took the poll, whether sexual infidelity or financial infidelity is worse. The thing with financial infidelity is exactly the same as having an affair. There's a huge breach of trust. But with financial infidelity, there can be a huge financial fallout as well, and that can take a very, very long time to actually get over. So the worst situation of financial infidelity I've come across, and I was right at the very end of it, was the husband basically forged his wife's signature on the mortgage documents, drew down copious amounts of money to prop up his business. She knew nothing about it until the bank phoned, and she answered the phone and they were about to foreclose on the house. That's the huge end. The little end of it, we all do little bits of financial infidelity. We all go and buy something and tuck it away and bring it out months later and go, oh, I've had this for ages. No, it's not just girls and dresses, it's guys and tools as well. So we all do that low level kind of stuff, but again, it's values driven. Quite often it's, again, polar personalities. Your spender personality will have a little credit card on the side that the partner doesn't know about, just so they can go shopping. The hoarder, the one who likes to save and is the one who's worried about money, might have a little bank account because they're worried that their spender partner is going to send them broke. That's financial infidelity.
Okay. And one of the questions that was submitted beforehand is a lot of our community are parents or parents-to-be, and obviously when you go on parental leave, you do drop down, particularly if you're the primary carer, quite significantly in income. So how do couples kind of navigate that, where there's a temporary but very significant drop in income for one person?
It's called planning. You kind of know, don't you, when you get pregnant, you have a period of time to plan for it. And this is the thing, that it's happening and you've got a window, and this is where you have to get into the numbers. Even if you can't do it together, one of you has to take responsibility, and one of you has to become, I use the term, the household banker. They have to be the person who puts on the big pants and says, we need to look at our numbers. We need to know what's going on. We need to know what we can change, what we can do now, while we've got 6 or 7 months to plan for it, rather than waiting for the day that we suddenly have this beautiful bouncing baby and suddenly discover we've bought the new car, we've bought all the toys, and we can't pay the rent. So it really is that simple. It comes down to planning. You just have to do it.
And I guess, what if you're already in it? Like you're very close to your due date, or you're on parental leave?
Okay, you need to plan fast. You're going to have to make some of those. You're going to have to make some fairly short, sharp decisions. And the way you make those short, sharp decisions is not just on looking at your grocery bill and going, we're going to slash it by 50%, or we're going to get rid of Netflix, or we're going to just suddenly do what I call a slash and burn approach. The way you need to look at it is you need to look at what you're spending. So you still have to know what you're spending. So you have to look back and go, what have we been spending? And then you will have awareness, because what's happened, because we don't use cash, we don't know what we're spending.
Mm-hmm.
So we have no idea where the stuff is going unless you're organised enough and you're already tracking it. So you need to know. So don't just sit down with a piece of paper and say, we're now going to spend $200 a week on groceries and da-da-da-da-da. If I asked every one of the couples that are here independently to write me a list of what their income and expenses are, I would get different lists between the partners, and I would get different lists from everybody, because we don't actually know. So you've got to look back. So you have to look back and then go, okay, what is the easy stuff here that we know there's a bit of wastage that we can click? Oh, good grief, we've got 5 streaming services. Which is the most important to us? Get rid of 3. We're doing, and it does come down to little things like we're doing coffees. We're doing 5 coffees a week. Let's cut it down to 2. Notice I'm saying cut it down. I'm not saying cut it out. There will be things that you know you can cut out. For example, are you realistically going to have time to go to the gym for the next 9 months? So maybe you can put that on hold. So you've got to look through at all of those expenses and go, where can we tweak? What can we change? What can we do differently? What can we change that we're currently spending money on that we can still get some enjoyment, but it doesn't cost us as much, or we can do it for free?
Okay. You know, I think one of the things that caught me by surprise when I went on parental leave was the feeling of being vulnerable and dependent on somebody else. So I had always had my own source of income since I was 16 and been able to earn, and to not have that. And it's not a reflection of my husband or his money style, but just the idea of suddenly not having my own source of income. So if you find yourself in that position, you know, what can you do about that? Because, you know, for me, for example, part of it was getting more visibility on our accounts. And, you know, we have, because of the way our finances were structured, I would have to ask my husband to have something transferred from one account. And so in the end, I got access so I could transfer it and have visibility. And that was really reassuring for me. And it's, again, not a reflection of him or his style at all. But what if you find yourself in that vulnerable position, what can you do about it?
Well, again, this is where your little pocket money account comes into play. So you still need to have that little bit. It might be not as much, but it's just knowing you've got some of that money there. But it is also, as you say, it's also the teamwork of managing the money together and sitting down and having the financial date nights once a month. And it's also expressing our feelings about how we feel, because quite often the stuff's going on and we don't necessarily attach the feeling that we've got is related to a change in situation around money. And so this is an area where at the moment there's a lot of financial anxiety happening, because there's, you know, a lot going on, prices have gone up, and the world's gone all a bit crazy. And the first thing I'm saying to all of the couples is actually just talk about how you're feeling. What is worrying you a little bit at the moment? And as you just have that general conversation, then it might actually pop up and go, oh, I just don't feel, I feel a bit out of kilter. I don't have the money that I used to have before. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Where does that lead? So again, a lot of it comes back down to communication, and it comes down to, as you say, visibility, and it comes down to still making sure that you do have a little bit of money that's your own, so that you don't have to go and ask hubby for the $10 because you're going to your coffee group and you don't have enough coffee right now. That's not a good position that you want to be in. So you still need to have that little bit of independent money. And it's actually, sorry guys, it is actually more important for women to have that than men for some strange reason, but it is.
Okay. And, you know, a couple of other questions we had submitted. So in many couples, one person often takes the lead on money. First, yes. Is that okay?
If it is agreed by both of you, yes, it's okay, because one person generally will always take the lead. This is why I give them the term the household banker. They are the person who takes on that responsibility to make sure that the bills get paid, to make sure that things actually happen. And again, sometimes that just falls naturally on one person. However, if you're in a situation where that person then takes total control and will not share the information with the other party, that's when you've got a potential issue, because it's not the transparency. Okay. So if you find yourself where you are asking questions and you are not getting answers, then that to me is a little bit of a red flag that you have got a power thing going on. But sometimes it's quite simply the fact that the person who's doing it is doing such an amazing job and you trust them. You don't feel that you need to ask those questions. You don't feel that you need to understand and know. In that situation, you still kind of do, but it's not such a priority. So yes, it is perfectly fine for one person to take the lead, as long as it's been agreed and as long as there's still communication and visibility going on around that role.
And I think that leads to a second question, which is, if you're the person who's not taking the lead at a minimum, what should you be asking or doing or knowing?
Okay, so first thing is you need to have access to the bank accounts. And it's very interesting because I've had this conversation with quite a few couples, and it has in both cases been the husband has said to his wife, but I've given you access and I've given you the PIN numbers, the numbers to get in. And she said, oh, but I still didn't feel as if I could. So there's a difference between having access, using it, and feeling as if it's okay to be doing that. And so as a minimum, yes, you need to be able to have visibility over your bank account so that you can see it. And this is why what I call the financial date nights are also really important. And that's just once a month getting together and just talking about money. And initially they will be transactional, but as you get into them, they become more about planning. What's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, what are we planning for, where are we heading, what do we want to do? And I've got one of my couples now who goes away for a weekend. So part of their date night is planning their next weekend away kind of thing. And they use it for goal setting and things like that. So it's having set times where you actually allocate 30 minutes or an hour to sit down and have that conversation about money.
Okay. And then, what if your partner is reluctant to talk about money? How can you get them on board? That was another question that was submitted.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one. It depends where the reluctance comes from two places. It comes from the reluctance of they've got an avoider money personality and they don't want to know. And that's because sometimes they feel incompetent or inadequate, or as I said before, they've got such a great money manager, they feel that they actually don't need to know. So if you're coming from that point where your partner is the one who is just not wanting to know and they're not engaging because they don't want to know, that is then where you need to have the kind of conversation where around kind of, honey, because you're not engaging, it's causing me stress, because quite often that person doesn't know that it's putting a huge weight on their partner's shoulder, having sole responsibility for all of this. So again, you come back to a feelings-based kind of conversation. And also little subtle things like leaving the odd bill on the table. And I know you're going to have to go and print these because we don't get paper anymore, but it's kind of leaving little things lying around and seeing if they actually start picking up and looking at it. So it's a slow process to get an avoider to actually engage and start to understand. Okay. If you've got someone where they won't tell you because it is that power thing, then you have to put your own oxygen mask on first, and you have to start looking and managing and being more proactive about looking after your own aspect of the finances and what you can control. So I worked with a couple in this situation and he didn't want to engage at all. So she was the one who was working. And so we just put a plan in place that made her feel comfortable that she was, she wasn't going to lose the roof over their head and all of those sorts of things. Once her anxiety about money came down, he then started to come to the party because he was going, I'm not going to talk to you about money because you just get angry and you just flip out about it. So sometimes it's you need to do something for yourself. So the other partner will then start to engage because they either don't want to have the argument or they just can't be bothered hearing the same story over and over and over again. So again, it's different for different people, but there's a few little strategies that you can kind of start to play with and just see what response you start to get.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the another question we had is, how can couples be accountable for what they say in their conversations? So maybe, for example, you have a conversation about what you're going to cut back on. We're both going to cut back on our coffees, and then the other person still keeps that going out and has a coffee. Or if you've got someone who always buys around and you're like, well, honey, maybe you can pull back on that, but they still go out. You agree on something, but then the behavior that comes out of that conversation is different. So where does that accountability come in as a couple?
Well, this is where, again, the monitoring side of what it is. And sometimes if you've got things like that, you almost have to have a set of rules. It's a bit like, the stars on the fridge that you have for your kids. When they do good behaviors, they get a star. It's almost like that's kind of what you need to do, because if you're not going to be accountable to each other for what you agree, then either it's because they've agreed when they didn't really intend to do it in the first place, or they agreed with the best of intentions, but after 5 beers, or what does it matter, we'll have the 6th anyway. So it's, why have they not agreed? Why have they not agreed to that behaviour? And this is where your date nights come in. Because on the date night, you can go back and say, I thought we had agreed this, and I'm paraphrasing it. You'll know how to speak to your own partner in their own way, but the fundamental kind of confirmation is, I thought we had an agreement like this. Did I misunderstand? What happened? How did we not manage to get to this? Did something change along the way that we need to relook at this and things like that? So it's again, it comes down to debriefing and understanding. This is all very much perfect world, and it's not always as easy as that, and you may find yourself in a bit of a yelling match around it. That happens. I mean, we're not all perfect, and we're not all going to have an agreement and be able to stick to it from day one. Yeah, I mean, I'm very good at breaking agreements about how much chocolate I'm going to eat. So it's the same thing with, put a chocolate bar in front of me, I'm going to eat it, sort of thing. And it's the same thing with money. And this, again, in that situation, maybe you need to look at the pocket money. So if he wants to shout or she wants to shout around, it comes out of their money, not your joint money.
Okay. Yeah, one of the techniques I heard was also from Brené Brown. So I think you're right, that conversation and having a regular opportunity to talk about it, but the phrasing she used was the story I tell myself. So when I see that you've brought around that or when I see X, the story I tell myself is this. And I think that kind of is a good way to convey how you feel, or the impact of those actions on you.
Yes, that's right. Because again, if you're looking at it from your own money story, which, just keep using the one as buying around, because that's a really cool one. And if you're the saver, then you wouldn't have done that in the first place, because that wouldn't have been the way you would naturally have done it. But if your partner is the spender, then they're not going to necessarily in the heat of the moment be able to slow down and go, hang on, we've got this agreement, I shouldn't be doing this. It's too late. The 10-second rule applies. You need at least 10 seconds for the rational brain to kick in and stop the emotional one going, hang on. So, hide the wallet or whatever it is, distract them so that you get that time gap to go, oh, hang on, is this what I'm supposed to do? Because it's also a habit. We've had these habits for a long time. So you're asking behavior change, you're asking habit change, you're asking money mindset change, you're asking a lot of both of you to suddenly go, we're not going to do this anymore, or we're going to do this less than we did it before. Mm-hmm. So it's a big change. It's a huge change. And as David, my mentor, he says, change is a process. It's not an event. So you've got to allow that process, and you've got to tweak it, and you've got to talk about it. Communication is the key to all of this. It doesn't matter what else is going on. You've got to be able to have those conversations. And some of them will be robust.
Yes, that's a polite way of putting it. I'm just watching the clock. I know I could keep asking you lots of questions. I'm going to go with one last one from that was pre-submitted. And then, so how regularly should couples be talking about money, and what tactics can couples use to meet in the middle if their money habits or views are different?
Okay, so every month, at least once a month, you should, I always say, run your household finances like a well-run business, which means you've got plans, you're measuring, you're monitoring, you're reviewing, and you're talking about it. So that's kind of what a date night covers. So you need to be talking about it at least once a month. And when it comes to this lovely thing called compromise, a really cool way is actually sitting with a line on a piece of paper, and it might be, this is, I did this with a client who was a presenter, and we were talking about clothes, and it was like, I need high-end designer gear. So we put that at the top of this line here. And then I said, okay, so what's the lowest that you would think of in terms of clothes? And we thought of gardening gear, which we would happily buy, at Kmart or the warehouse. And that was the other end. And I'm going, okay, so where in the spectrum do you feel comfortable? And you could do this, that this is a joint expense. And so one of you might draw the line here and the other might draw a line here. So you haven't got a gap this wide, you've now got a gap this wide. Mm-hmm. So it is actually just discussing, and again, this is where your beliefs and your values come into it. And also that lovely term, opportunity cost. If I didn't spend $200 on this, what value am I going to get in my life later on by choosing not to do this? Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing. And this is where goals are really important, because once you've got your some things that you're working towards, you understand what each of you want, what each of you need, then a lot of this compromise becomes a lot easier, because you're on the same path. You want the same things at the end. So that naturally kind of brings you more to the middle, because you can look at it and go, well, actually, we don't need that anymore. We don't need that, or we can do it this way instead of that way.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Lynda. I've learned heaps from this conversation. I'm going to try. I want to say thank you very much for your time. But if there are any resources you want to share with this group about where they can kind of take this conversation further, what do you have available on your website to help folks?
Yeah. So the first thing is go onto the website, moneymentalist.com, take the money personality quiz. Won't take you very long to do that. There's also a couple of ebooks that are on the website that you can also download. One of them, funnily enough, is called Couples and Money. The other one is just a general one, and it's called Spice Up Your Relationship with Money, which is a lot about the mindset for your own kind of individual thinking. So those resources are certainly all there. We're on, yeah, you can you follow us. I have a newsletter that comes out, so you're happy to get onto the mailing list and things like that. But certainly the ebooks and the Money Personality Quiz is a really good starting point.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope Lynda was able to get to a lot of your questions. I'm sure you can find her online as well if you've got anything that she wasn't able to answer or we ran out of time for today. I've just launched a short poll just to get a bit of feedback. This is only the second conversation that we've had, so we're always looking to get better and improve. And yeah, so would really appreciate your feedback. So thank you so much